Hello, welcome back to my channel, and this is Cool at Psychology. In this video, we'll be talking about the interference theory as an explanation for forgetting by looking at the model answer, outline and evaluate interference theory as an explanation for forgetting, which is a 16 marker in the AQA Psychology A-level syllabus. So, as usual, we'll start with AO1 and then go into AO3. AO1 is 6 marks, AO3 is 10 marks, so more weight to AO3. In the interference theory, we want to mention about overall what it is, and then there are two types of interference, I believe, are proactive and retroactive. We want to define what they are, because apart from defining and giving an example, there's really nothing else to talk about. And if that's all done correctly, I believe that should be straightforward and fairly easy to gain full marks in AO1 in this topic. I mean, usually we'll see like questions like outline, evaluate like both interference theory and retrieval failure theory together as explanations with the S for forgetting. But in my channel here, I'm just like separating interference theory out from retrieval failure, just to give an insight more deeply about like if it's interference theory alone, how would we structure the answer? If it's not retroactive. If it's retrieval failure theory alone, how would we structure that too? So to gain more deep insights about like each topic specifically in depth. And that's why AO1 is slightly shorter in this video and the next video as well. Okay, so what's interference theory? Interference theory explains forgetting as a result of one memory disrupting the recall of another memory. This theory is mainly concerned with forgetting in long-term memory and suggests that memory becomes confused or mixed together, especially when they are similar. There are two types of interference, proactive interference and retroactive interference. Okay, we need to say that for interference, it happens in long-term memory because that's what it did. It happens. Yeah, that's what it occurs in the memory theory. We can't just leave that out because I mean, like, why does it happen in long-term memory rather than short-term? Because imagine like I usually say this in Thai, that's why I find it more tricky to explain this part. But imagine like a disk, like a small one and a large one. A small one would represent like short-term memory and a large one would be long-term. Just think about that, like the capacity of the two different memory types, memory stores. Yeah. So a small disk can contain like not a lot of items in there, and there's more items definitely in the large disk. So think of long-term memory having like many pieces of information, many pieces of items in the large disk. And when that happens, you're more likely to uncover that there are some items that appear similar to each other than the chance of like finding something similar in a smaller disk, if you get what I mean. So that's like the way I explain it, not in written text here, but like the way I teach, like spoken verbally to my students to explain that's the reason why long-term memory has interference and why interference is less likely to happen in short-term memory. But the idea of interference here, like in written text here, we need to say that like when something interferes with each other, it's because it's similar and it causes memories to be mixed up, confused. Because when something's similar, we can't really like separate the two items from each other. Like imagine identical twins when they look like very similar. Sometimes we call the wrong person's name, right? Something like that. Okay, I wasted a bit of time here just to get an idea about what interference actually is. But let's look into like the two types of interference, starting with proactive interference occurs when an older memory interferes with a recall of a newer memory. In this situation, past learning makes it more difficult to remember recent information. For example, If a person changes their password frequently, they may recall an old password instead of the new one. So think of the word pro as moving forward and retro as moving backwards. So that's why proactive interference is when like older information makes the newer information more difficult to recall. And retro is backwards, so this is the opposite now. Retroactive interference occurs when a newer memory interferes with the recall of an older memory. This means that recent learning disrupts previous stored information. For example, after learning Spanish, a student who previously studied French may struggle to recall French vocabulary because the newer Spanish memories interferes with the older French memories. So this time the new memory makes it more difficult to recall the older memory. Opposite to proactive interference. Nothing difficult to understand here. Then interference is more likely when two sets of information are similar, basically just like an elaboration of what was already written. This is because similar memories may compete during retrieval, leading to confusion and forgetting. I just think it's good to say that like it leads to no, no, not it leads to that it happens like during retrieval because think of multi-store model. I tend to like link it back to that topic in memory. That long-term memory can be retrieved back. That information in long-term memory can be retrieved back to short-term memory, and that's how we try to recall certain pieces of information in our long-term memory. So interference happens during retrieval. It's just good to state that somewhere in the AO1. And that's it for AO1. For AO3, as usual, when something's a theory, we need strength as like supporting study, but just use two different pieces of research. If you can't remember the researcher's name, then you can just say a supporting study found that, da 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 da. But try not to invent up your own study because they do check on that unless it's a study that if you make studies up, unless it's like something that is highly likely to happen in the real world of research, something likely to be conducted, that's fine. Okay, in this case, we mainly, most schools teach MacGouch. I'm not sure how to pronounce this right. MacGouch, MacGouch, yeah, whatever, and MacDonald, and Batley and Hitch. So that's why I picked these two studies. But if you used other studies, then just use those, as long as you can explain how it supports interference theory. So one strength of interference theory is support from laboratory research. These two researchers, not going to read their names, asked participants to learn a list of words before learning a second list that varied in similarity to the original. Recall of the first list was poorest when the second list contained similar words, such as synonyms. I mean, in this study, I believe there are like many conditions, maybe 6, if I don't recall that wrong. But you don't need to write all of the groups on findings, numbers out here. I mean, if you can remember them correctly, that's good. If not, don't like invent up the like random numbers, percentages. Don't just as long as you can explain how like the groups are different or how like the experimental group with synonyms had like poor recall, like why they had poor recall, and link that to interference theory, then that's already perfect for full marks. Okay, this demonstrates we need to explain now retroactive interference because new learning disrupted recall of previously learned information or learned information. The findings also support the theory's claim that interference is greatest when memories are similar. So that's why we want to refer to the group that learned synonyms. And we can be specific here that it's retrograde. No, not retrograde, retroactive interference. Yeah, because something about like students studying like GCSE edXL or me teaching that. Retrograde is for amnesia. Retroactive is for interference. So that's we don't have retrograde interference and we don't have retroactive amnesia. I mean, both start with retro. So that's just something, if you study the edXO syllabus, something to be aware of as well. Yeah, we need to say that memories are similar. We can be specific that it's retroactive and explain that like it's because like what they actually measured in this study was how much participants can recall the original word list. So that's why it's retroactive rather than proactive. And then we need a link sentence. Therefore, the study provides strong empirical support for interference as an explanation for forgetting. If you haven't done so already, we need the link sentence at the end. And that's perfect for this study. Another one, so another strength comes from research by Badley and Hitch involving rugby players. Participants were asked to recall the names of teams they had played against during the season. Players who had played the most matches showed the greatest forgetting, regardless of how much time had passed since the games were played. We need something about what they need to do, so the task, the procedure, and the results. Like maybe just one sentence each. We don't need like too long for you don't have all day to write in a real-timed exam condition. Then explain. This suggests that forgetting was caused by interference from numerous similar memories of rugby matches rather than by the passage of time alone. Therefore, the findings support interference theory and increase its validity because they demonstrate interference effects in a more realistic everyday setting. The first study was done in a lab. This time it's done in real life. I decided to use both of these studies because it's widely taught in most schools. Also that one is lab and one is real life. So it's better to cover both to make the theory more we want to have like both depth and breadth. We want the idea that the theory is not just from lab studies, it's from like real life studies too. And with that being said, when I say like in the weakness, we can evaluate the studies from the strength, right? And say like the first study is lab. It is. And it is, so it means that the first study lacks ecological validity. But I tend to try and not like, okay, I mean I use that. I use that here. Only use it when there aren't other better weaknesses to use. I mean that why? Because we actually also have like studies that are in real life setting. But I mean, if there are more lab studies than there are real life studies, use the word like much or many or most of the studies come from lab studies. That's fine. So as long as your writing style is clear, the words you use are clear, then it's fine to like use whatever as the weakness, as long as it's clearly explained. If you don't have the word much here and you just simply say like, one limitation is that supporting evidence comes from lab studies and it lacks ecological validity, blah, blah, blah. It sounds like we're evaluating just this study and claiming that the entire interference theory doesn't represent real life when it actually does to an extent. But by saying like, okay, I mean, this point is not wrong. It's entirely not wrong, but like it's just the writing style to not get deducted marks. It's not just the clarity, it's about the writing style, the language that you use as well. Nothing to do with like English grammar. My English is terrible, both spoken, both written English. But why can I study psychology and teach it? It's because like the wordings that are used. However, one limitation is that much of the supporting evidence for interference theory comes from laboratory studies involving artificial tasks, such as learning word lists. The word much here makes it sound a lot better. Remembering lists of unrelated words may not reflect how memory operates in everyday life or real life, where information is often meaningful and personally relevant. Although studies such as Badley and Hitch, so not just like one study alone, like these sorts of studies, and just an example. Rugby players research provide more realistic support or reading a sentence in full. Although studies such as Badley and Hitch, rugby player research provide more realistic support. Much of the evidence remains based on artificial materials. Why is this sentence necessary? Or why is it like good to have? It's not necessary, it's just extra, but it's good to have. It makes this entire paragraph not evaluating just not just this lab study alone, and it makes it more clear that even though we do have badly unhinged, which comes from real life, most studies still come from like lab settings or artificial settings, which is why most of the idea about interference doesn't fully reflect real life. Then we can go on to link. Therefore, the findings may lack ecological validity and may not fully represent real-world forgetting. Simple. I mean, simple if you use clear writing style. Like some words do make a big difference. Some studies can provide great examples. So I believe, yes, even though some points can be counter-argued, the writing is important to still be able to use this weakness and get full marks. Otherwise, you need to think about what other weaknesses are great or better to use than lacking ecological validity. And if there aren't I mean, I chose this because all psychology students must study methodological issues, but I believe there might be like some small studies or some like small evaluation points in different textbooks are different as weaknesses. And because those are not popular, I decide not to go with those from the Pink Hair Girl textbook I used. Yeah, just be selective. Or if you can remember like the weaknesses from your textbook, you can use that. But it's just like something very, very specific that I just don't decide to go with when writing out a model answer for everyone to watch. Then another weakness, I think this time it's not evaluating the study anymore, but it's the weakness of the theory itself. So another weakness is that interference theory cannot explain all types of forgetting. People can forget information even when there is little similar information available to interfere with it. I mean, this sounds logical as long as some weaknesses. I mean, can you make up your own weakness if it doesn't come from the textbook? Can that still be used? As long as it sounds logical, it makes sense, and it appeals to most people's common sense. So the same idea there, me just repeating myself. Yeah, just use that, but clearly explain what you mean by that. It doesn't mean everything you use must come from the textbook. Sometimes teachers ask students to like brainstorm out your own ideas about what's wrong with the theory, how it can be improved, etc., etc. Those are fantastic, but you need to be selective about which ones are able to be explained best. So this is one of them, because the theory doesn't explain all types of forgetting, and in real life, sometimes something that doesn't appear similar and we still forget that. Maybe because but there are other factors or something about it. So in addition, well, my point here in this paragraph is that there's also retrieval failure that explains forgetting. I'm trying to not use the word reductionist because I'm not actually that sure whether this theory is holistic or reductionist, but I believe it is reductionist. Anyway, we're talking about like different types of forgetting here. One is interference and the other is like retrieval, which I think both is in long-term memory. Yeah. So in addition, retrieval cues can sometimes trigger apparently forgotten memory, suggesting that the memory may still be stored out, maybe be stored, but I see that B as O. Oh, just a bit blurred. Be stored but temporarily inaccessible. Okay, there we go. This indicates that forgetting may be caused by retrieval failure rather than interference alone. It's quite hard to think about like how retrieval cues are like can better explain forgetting than interference. But my point is just like we need to try and find something to write, right? And because of that, we need to try and really think about like how retrieval cues are like better explanation. It's better because like it suggests like memory can still be there, but it's just not be able to like retrieve it correctly. Don't get me wrong that interference and retrieval failure is the same thing. It's actually different, even though somewhere in AO1, yeah, I did mention that it's during the retrieval process, but no, it's not driven, different process. And that's why retrieval cues can actually be another explanation. Our retrieval failure can be another explanation. as to how like retrieval cue helps remember. And when that is absent, sometimes people just can't fully access that information, but it's still there. So it doesn't mean that interference explains all type of forgetting because of that. This indicates forgetting may be caused by retrieval failure rather than interference alone. Therefore, interference theory is reductionist. Oh, I did use this word. It's just at the end, as it provides only a partial explanation for forgetting, reducing its explanatory power. I'm actually thinking about attention. And I was gonna say that earlier, but I just want to finish off this paragraph first. Attention is actually from from sensory memory to short-term memory, which is a different process to interference and retrieval because we're talking about information that is in long-term memory. So if some students think about maybe other factors could be that people don't pay attention in the first place, so they forget information. I'm gonna say that's wrong because attention has nothing to do with like long-term memory and something that is forgotten. I mean, the word forgetting is wide. It can refer to forgetting of any kind, forgetting from short-term, forgetting from long-term memory, right? But in this case, the question is on interference theory, and we're talking about information in long-term memory. My viewpoint and the examiner viewpoint might be different, but I just don't want it to be, don't want you guys to like be too risky and talk about attention because that's from a different memory store. That's all. So just beware and maybe like ask your teachers, consult like your advisor or tutor or someone to check with this viewpoint. But I believe it's better to go with like retrieval failure being another explanation. So the interference theory is reductionist. And same when it comes to the retrieval failure question, we can say that that's reductionist because we also have interference theory, blah, 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 right? Reducing its explanatory power. Okay, this makes this weakness perfect when you bring in something else and explain that a little bit, but the entire paragraph is not about retrieval failure. Same as to how if a question's about retrieval failure, the entire paragraph wouldn't be writing everything you know about interference. It would just be something from another theory and explaining that, how it makes the topic in this question reductionist. Okay, now on to the additional strength. Why do I always have it in brackets? Because I believe that it's better to use supporting studies to evaluate something that is either like a theory, a model, or an explanation. And in this case, it is. So that's gonna be like the best strength to use. But if you can't recall all of the like up to like two supporting studies to use in a strength, try to think about like how the theory is useful, how can that be applied to real life, to real world. So in terms of practical applications for interference theory, I said a further strength is that interference theory has practical applications. For example, students revising similar subjects consecutively may experience interference between topics. Teachers and learners can reduce forgetting by spacing revision sessions and varying subjects studied. And that's something you guys can do as well. This increases the usefulness of the explanation because it can be applied to educational setting. Maybe a bit short, but yeah, it's like an example for people to think about what can be written for practical applications in this topic. So if you have any other practical application ideas, please feel free to comment below, or if you have any questions, same, please feel free to comment below as well. And I hope this video is useful and see you guys in the next video. All right, bye.